Welcome to Metro DMV Realty Real Estate Insider. I'm Mike McCarthy, realtor and broker owner. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, I'm here to bring clarity to the DC Metro market. Welcome to the show. Today I have with me Rich Wynn from MBH. Rich, thanks so much for coming on today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So today, folks, we're going to talk about what buyers need to know within title guidelines and title insurance and so forth. And Rich, if you could start off and just tell everyone a little bit about you, what you're doing these days, and how you're helping buyers and sellers out of
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. My name is Rich Nguyen. I am a real estate attorney. That's my specialty, my focus, and I've been doing that for 22 years now, believe it or not. And I started out doing title for my dad's title company back when I was a young lawyer. Got out of that, went to litigation. So I went to court to fight over things like title. So I did that for 15-ish years. Yeah, and then came back to title. So I took title, did something different, and came back to title with all this knowledge I have about what not to do and what to do, more importantly. So I combine all of that in what I do at MBH. So we do transactions, real estate closings, mostly residential, also some commercial. And within those, most files don't have too much drama, let's call it that. And once in a while there is, no problem. I go in there and I can dissect it with my staff and fix things, figure things out, advise our buyers and sellers, and get them to the closing table. So my job is to get to that closing, have a great closing, smile, shake hands, kiss babies, give keys to the buyers, and wrap it all up in a nice ball.
That's what it's all about, Rich. You know. So I know we had met probably 7-8 years ago, I guess, and I know you have helped us out in my office, and I personally have to remember what lane I'm in when I call you and say, hey, Rich, I need some help with this, and you're like, well, hey, I'm representing you on the title side here. We're working through this transaction as not an attorney per se, representing you on these matters. So I think that also, it has come up for us in the past where you've given us some just really good, helpful hints and advice on things. Could you maybe discuss a little bit about that role in terms of title today in Virginia per se? We'll stick with in terms of the attorney, and then there's a lot of other offices throughout the state that may not have attorneys on staff. So what can you maybe share with our viewers in that regard?
Sure, I'll make it as simple as I can, because the lay of the land is quite simple on the surface. If you dive deeper into it, you can get pretty involved. But so MBH, for example, is a title company. Yeah. It is what they call a lay settlement agent. So the company itself is not a law firm, and it's not necessarily run by lawyers or owned by lawyers. It's run by just regular people, and regular people that have title insurance licenses. So basically, you don't have to be a lawyer to do closings in Virginia. MBH chooses to have lawyers on staff like myself, and by doing that, they have an extra layer of expertise, and we can kind of watch things with a more technical eye and make sure things go smoother. While it's not required, they choose to do that at MBH, and I'm lucky for that. And the clients benefit too, because instead of, if there's something comes up, for example, while the lawyers at MBH, like myself, we don't practice law, okay? We're not actually lawyers, but we take our expertise and we can use it to give guidance, let's call it that, in the transaction. Whereas title companies that don't have attorneys on staff would have to either say we don't get into that, or call somebody else. Within our company, we can get guidance and direct people to the right place they need to be. Also, our staff is highly skilled. So most of the title clearing, to be honest, is done by our processors and our underwriters. And the things that boil to the surface that I have to look at are pretty serious matters. If it gets to me, it means there's something pretty, not concerning, but something that needs to be looked at closer with some expertise. And with that, I work with my staff to find a solution to cure title problems, to get through title issues. And so I would say the vast majority of title companies in the DMV area have an attorney on staff, or an attorney that they can call quickly. MBH has, at last count, I think 10 attorneys that orbit the offices that are literally next to the processors that can jump in right away and resolve things. So yeah, so hopefully that gives some ideas to how we differentiate ourselves in the market. Also, I have a law practice separate from MBH entirely. And that law practice usually just drafts deeds for the closings, because MBH isn't a law firm and can't prepare legal documents. A lot of times I'll get calls from other title companies that have transactions that go sideways, and they refer their buyers or sellers to my law firm, and I get to see a whole separate, different side of the transactions. So in that situation, because my law firm has been asked to give advice and represent the parties, I can actually dive in there and represent buyers or sellers, be their attorney, which I can't do if I'm representing the transaction or the contract. So that's hopefully not too confusing of a distinction. So title companies have lawyers that don't practice law, but help out. Law firms have attorneys that can help out and represent buyers and sellers if there's a problem. Those two, I orbit both of those worlds. So it gives me respect.
Makes complete sense, and I think in context, yeah, that I understand that. I think though, when I was first starting out, I wanted to go and work with somebody who I knew was competent in those areas, whether or not you could just share that kind of advice with us. Again, not giving legal advice, but just talking through and having intelligent conversations to help us get to the closing table. So I know the transactions that you've helped me with have not all been easy, and we won't get into some of. We had some short sales that you helped us with. We had some regular retail transactions. Matter of fact, you probably did more retail transactions for us than our short sale or distressed sale transactions. But there's a lot of things that do come up, in those when you're checking title and so forth. And I guess if you could maybe just try to educate buyers, what's some real important things that they should be mindful of when they're selecting a title company? Or I guess let me back up. A lot of times they're going to rely on their agent, right? So it's all about your relationships and so forth. But for our audience and viewers that may be outside of the DMV, what advice would you give those particular buyers that are looking for a reputable title company to help them?
Yeah. Track record, right? How they've done in the past is a good indicator of how they'll do in the future. So MBH has been around for I think 31 years now, and the track record is there, and we're a known quantity. There are, I have interacted in transactions with other title companies. For example, in let's say in a split closing or seller side transaction, which we can get into more later.
Sure.
And once, let's put it this way: if your agent knows a company and they've worked with them many times and they haven't let them down, whoever that is, I would think that's a safe bet. Yeah. Not a lot, but some clients I run into will hear the recommendation of their agent and then go shop around for the cheapest guy in town, and that's not always the best thing to do. Sure. Because someone that can afford to cut their fees, probably doesn't have a lot of staff, doesn't have an overhead, is trying to just get a deal in the door because they might be a little desperate for it, let's say that. So the cheapest guy in town is not what is always the best. And so that track record, the staff behind the door is important, right? So at MBH, for example, we have, I'm an attorney, I have a staff of a processor, a pre-closer, a post-closer, a person answering the phone. There's at least 5 people that handle that file. Some places you go, there's one person there. And once one person gets overwhelmed, you're looking at title issues or issues that sit on a shelf or sit in someone's to-do list for too long. And one of the caveats I'll put out there is that with a closing timeline of, say, 30 days, sometimes less these days, a title issue that pops up could change that timeline. Something like an unreleased deed of trust, very common, probably the most common thing we see. You're rolling the dice. You don't know if that bank that whose loan was paid off yet not released is in business anymore, if they've been sold or assigned to 10 different other banks. Most of the time that can be resolved. It's usually resolvable in a week or two, but if it's not resolved in a week or two, it's in an indeterminate amount of time. Yeah. And that gets into title exceptions and other ways to clear it or close with an unreleased deed of trust on there. So that's a very common scenario. Heirs, right? So a seller may have inherited a property, and they may think they own the whole property, or think maybe they and their brother own the property. Well, guess what? We do a title search. We look at all the potential heirs, and sometimes people come out of the woodwork. And we've spent some cases 6 months to a year tracking down, cousins, nephews, twice removed. And strangely enough, we managed to do it, but that takes having a buyer that's willing to wait for a seller to do that. And having the expertise to do that is one thing, but also having the parties understand what's going on, that it's not necessarily anyone's fault, it's just a mechanism of the legal system, how we have to go through and verify and get signatures from all the people that might have any interest in the property. So that's another thing. And the next most common issue that would come up, we have unreleased deeds of trust, heirs out there, and we have property condition is something that's come up more so now than a few years ago. As you may know, during COVID, home inspections weren't a thing. People bought it as is, sight unseen, First time they saw it was after they closed, right? But now we're having home inspections. So this morning I had to walk through a couple home inspection addendums and protocols for that are a little tricky. And as you know, the contract forms have changed every 6 months. There's little additions and subtractions from those forms. Who can void in the situation of repairs or refusal to repair, who can't void. That trips up some agents, not you, of course. But I find myself walking through addendums and inspections and appraisal addendums and escalations more so now than during COVID. Sure. Yeah, so things are but that's normal. That's how the market should be. There should be buyers exercising rights to protect themselves from things like that. So yeah, hopefully that's an overview.
No, that's great. I think that, you had mentioned too, I think the one trick wonder, or the one person answering the phone and dealing with, the files and so forth. And I can tell you that overall for our consumer experience, if you have that and you couple that with a busy realtor or a broker even that may not be familiar with the transaction or know that there could potentially be a title issue, I mean, as you can see, folks, that can definitely snowball pretty quickly into a situation that you're pretty unsatisfied with. What's going on with this closing? Why isn't it closing? And it's a combination. I think the one thing that I do really like about working with MBH is the communication. It stays open. I know that I can reach out to Rich. I know that Rich will call me back when he's finished with one of his clients or closings and give me the answers, whether or not I want to hear it or not. And that to me is again, delivering that expectation, that experience overall to our clients, right? And telling them, hey, unfortunately, today this isn't working the way that we had anticipated, but we're delivering that information to them as soon as we can. So I think that that's one real big thing that comes up. I can tell you that when we advise our clients, and we hear there's a lot of confusion, when I wouldn't say as much now as there had been years back, as they were shopping, different title companies or lenders and that sort of thing. What if you could just give maybe a basic overview of just title insurance and why it's important, why should a buyer have it, maybe a lender's policy versus an owner's policy, and just to educate our viewers and what the differences are on those.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's one of the topics on the settlement statement that I think some title companies gloss over. It's literally 2 line items. The amount of money on those items is not a small amount, anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 or $4,000 and upward of that. So the first one I'll talk about is the lender's title insurance policy. So basically this is insurance over legal rights. Okay, the lender's policy ensures the lender, or protects the lender and only the lender, that if they needed to foreclose on the property, which is a big if, that if there was a title issue that prevented them from taking control of that property to sell it at auction and get their money back, that they would be covered by that insurance. And that covers usually up to the amount of the loan. It does not protect the buyer at all. And that's something that I try to stress at closings or even before closing, to say that a lender's policy protects the lender. You have a separate policy that you can choose to purchase, and that policy is called the owner's policy. And that protects the buyer, the owner, against any title issues that might cause them to lose ownership of the property, either partially or in full, up to the purchase price of the property. And there's an enhanced policy as well that increases over time with appreciation of the property. And again, it's an optional policy that buyers can choose to purchase, but the vast majority of buyers, we recommend they purchase it, and they do purchase it. Every property I've ever purchased, I get owner title insurance policies. And where we see those come up the most, and this is one of those reasons, why should I buy title insurance, right? So the strange thing about the owner's title insurance policy, while it does protect about things in the past done by people you've never met that may pop up in the future that might affect your title, It could very well cover things that happen during the closing process in which you're buying that title insurance policy. For example, those unreleased deeds of trust we talked about, which is a loan that's paid off in the past that is not released from title in the future, that pops up again in a subsequent transaction that has to be cleared later on down the road. Well, if the transaction at hand involves a payoff, the loan is paid off, the lender goes bankrupt or forgets or just doesn't record that lien release, you don't find out until 5 years later when you sell the property. Guess what? If you don't buy owner's title insurance, you got to go figure that out yourself. You have to call Rich, the attorney at his law firm, and be like, hey, I need your help. And to get my help to do that, or another attorney's help to do that, costs more than that policy would have cost.
Sure.
For an attorney to go and release a lien from a defunct bank involves going to court, filing a lawsuit to quiet title to release that lien, and that costs anywhere from, if you're real lucky, $5,000 to 15 to upward of tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how difficult it is. A title insurance policy for that property, I'm pretty sure wouldn't cost that much for the owner's policy. And there's a split between how much is paid for the lender's and owner's policy, but most owner's policies are not even $5,000. So if you had bought that policy, a claim is made on that policy. It usually, if the lien can't be released through other means, that policy would pay any damages or losses arising from the unreleased deed of trust. So yeah, so it's for something that happened in that transaction. It's not no fault of MBH, but the lender could have had an issue, right?
I mean, are you seeing people today not taking that? Because I mean, I know we advise them always to take it, except that, you know, make sure that they have it.
Percentage-wise, maybe single-digit percent of people don't get owner's title insurance policy, and I explained politely why they should get it, but most it's a cost savings usually, and we respect that. You know, it's not. But the vast majority, I would say, at least 90% of buyers will get that. And when they don't, it's not for any reason than saving money. And I always remind them that if there's an issue, we have several waivers of title insurance that they have to sign, advising that if there's an issue in the future, you're on your own and have to retain separate counsel on your own dime to do that. And sometimes people come around, and when they understand that, they do actually purchase it. Yeah. And some still feel it's not worth it, and we respect that. But the vast majority do. We highly recommend it. And as an attorney that works outside of a title company, I've seen it happen where someone has come to my law firm with a title issue, and the first thing I'll ask is, did you buy the owner's title insurance policy? And I hope they say yes. And if they do say yes, they go out that door and I tell them to file a claim. If they say no, come on in, get your credit card out, and we'll talk. So yeah, so that's the flip side of not buying title insurance.
And it's a very long process too, like you said. It could be, you know, depending upon how complicated that matter may very well be. So, I mean, folks, I can't say how important it is personally. I think it's a great idea, obviously, to make sure, you know, the biggest investment of your life, you're going to have that insurance policy on the property. Rich, what would you say today in terms of any advice you could give to a buyer who's just, you know, I mean, we've got an affordability problem, right, for a lot of buyers in the market, you know, especially if they're first-time home buyers or, you know, even people moving up, you take that equity out of your house and you go and you got to upgrade, you got to pay more unless you're downgrading and so forth. But what is it, any advice that you could give to potential buyers in terms of things that maybe they should be on the lookout for, that maybe if they have an agent that maybe was a friend who hasn't been in the business a long enough time, may not be able to point out to them, like any red flags or anything that you could point out that they should be mindful of in checking properties or anything to that effect that you might be able to just educate buyers on? Yeah,
so since now it's not so much of a seller's market, buyers have rights that they can't exercise, and they should exercise. So if someone, the climate during COVID, again, was this free-for-all, right? Seller's market. Do anything to get that deal ratified, which means usually giving up all inspections, all contingencies, basically buying it sight unseen. Those days are gladly over. So an agent that's willing to justify why certain inspections and contingencies are necessary instead of waiving them just to try to get that deal done. And an experienced agent, such as yourself, that understands the lay of the land, that knows, If the property doesn't have any substantial issues, why shouldn't a seller give an inspection? And the seller pushes back hard, you have to wonder what it is they're trying to get under the radar, right? So yeah, just exercising rights that you have as a buyer, because you're going to pay top dollar still. Prices haven't declined much, if at all, in the DMV area. Know what you're buying, right? And have an agent that understands the home inspection contingency options. There's more than one, and which box you check dictates how that goes. And there's sometimes very short timelines on doing the inspection, submitting the report to the seller, negotiating is one of the options, and if you can't negotiate it, voiding it. Yeah. So this morning I had a call from an agent that was the topic. And so I got the text in the morning, I'm driving back from the gym, and it's, hey, the buyer submitted their home inspection report. We countered, they never signed the counter, and so where do we stand? So I said, hey, let me get back to the office. Let me look at the actual terms of it. And we went through it. And I said the deadlines were not met by that buyer. And they could be stuck with no repairs being done because they didn't void in time. Mm-hmm. Luckily, he's a very nice agent with the seller that's willing to cooperate. Maybe some oversight on the buyer's part, but deadlines, I think, were missed, right? And so I'm not sure why. I'm still trying to figure out what happened, but an agent, probably should have been on top of those deadlines, calling and interacting with the other agent up to that deadline, instead of just silence that had to be interpreted as agreement or disagreement or So I see all of that. Time is of the essence, right? So understanding what that means, that's a question I get all the time by regular people. Regular educated people don't understand what time is of the essence means, and that's okay. And that means deadlines are deadlines. Yeah. You miss a deadline, you're dead. And so if it says 2 days, the NVR contract, for example, says 9 o'clock on that second day. After that, you've lost whatever right you had up to that day. And so, so a lot of deals go sideways because deadlines are missed. So have an agent that knows the contract, understands how the timing works and how the contingencies, the intricacies work. How do you figure that out? Have a conversation with that agent. Yeah. Have them walk you through the options, right? Why this box versus this box? Yeah. And if I do this box, what are my obligations? How are these blanks being filled in? Should this blank be 5 days? Is that enough to get a home inspection? Should the negotiation period be 2 days? Is that enough to negotiate? That's a pretty tight timeline.
And you add well and septic to it, right?
All that, right? Yeah.
Folks, so one of the things too, especially, for the agents out there, you can always get a seller to, obviously extend that timeline, right? But you got to do that on the front end. You can't, wait until after the fact and then ask them for that extension. But there are quite a few, and I will say that there's a misnomer in the REO world and the distressed assets that we do sell a lot of. It's not all we sell, but well, it's an as-is sale. We can't inspect it. No, you can absolutely inspect. That's your right, as a buyer, to inspect these properties. I think that at the end of the day, they are as-is sales, right? But you still have the right as a buyer to determine whether or not you want to move forward with that or not. Are you seeing in that regard, are you seeing any lenders that, I know you had mentioned the home inspection contingency forms and reading through, I guess, some of the terms that you're not probably accustomed to seeing as much as we had in past, obviously during COVID and so forth. Are you seeing anything that really just deal breakers right now that the lenders are pushing back on in terms of maybe?
Yeah. I have one scenario. So a lot of people did renovations on properties. In past years, right? And some of those renovations, modifications change how easy it is to comp the property. So additions that are not exactly your typical addition, extra structures with extra dwelling units, and a dwelling unit is a area of the property that has a kitchen, its own. It can sustain a person, has a bathroom and a kitchen basically, and a place to sleep. People that did that for purposes of making a rental property, right, go then to sell the property. It's just an odd duck, let's call it that, and it's hard to find a comp for that. So if the appraiser can't find a comp, can't do the appraisal, you can't get a loan for it, and that's something I'm seeing, not a lot, but I have seen, right? And why would there be a lot of that? Is because, yeah, people, there was a big push for real estate investing recently. It's been a big thing. Everyone's a real estate investor or wants to be. And there's house hacking, and people just get in there, and it's a short-term idea of what to do, and I want to rent the place out for as many rooms, as many doors as I can. And you roll the dice with whether or not you can sell it later on. So just, I would say this, when you are doing additions and renovations to property, keep in mind, is this something that just looks like the rest of the neighborhood? Is this something that has a comp somewhere in the neighborhood that you can use to then sell the property?
There you go.
Because it's something that could be worth a lot, but if you can't comp it.
Don't over-improve it, folks. You don't want to over-improve that neighborhood. And then the other thing that, we didn't touch on, but is something that, my head always goes to, well, is it permitted? And then you get into the whole retroactive permitting, which is a topic for another entire podcast. But
it's interesting. That's an interesting point too. This is something I get asked about a lot. So in Virginia, there are certain disclosures sellers have to make when they do sell a property. And the question I get a lot is, do the permits or the lack of permits have to be disclosed by a seller? And the answer in Virginia is no. And people go, oh, it doesn't make sense. They should tell us when they don't have a permit, but that doesn't make sense. If they don't have a permit, usually they don't know it. Right. So it's on the buyer to exercise due diligence to go to the county and ask. It's a public record. All the permits in any house, you can actually access it from online in most counties in Virginia. Yeah. And you can know, you see a deck on it, does it have a deck permit? Finished basement, does it have a permit? And that's often missed.
Yeah.
Often missed.
It's a simple, I know in Virginia, FOIA requests for those smaller jurisdictions that may not be as big as like Fairfax or Loudoun counties and so forth, where you can pull it online, but it is pretty simple, and it's definitely worth the few minutes to check up on that.
Yeah, and if it's not permitted, there's no recourse in the standard contract. It doesn't say if it's not permitted, the buyer can get anything. Right. You're stuck with all the permits that are on it. Yeah. So even checking it before you put an offer in, an idea, right? Who's doing that? Not many people, but maybe. If there's a lot of visible additions.
One is the market ebbs and flows too, right? So it may not be as big of an issue during a seller's market where everyone's trying to bid up on homes, but now that inventory has, we're seeing more price reductions in certain markets. Certain neighborhoods obviously are still closing and selling pretty quick with multiple offers if they're priced right. But ultimately at the end of the day, there's still that opportunity in the future to potentially, as that buyer, now seller 5 years from now, having an issue. You know what I mean? So it's just something to be mindful of, when we're looking at the permitting and so forth, because retroactive permit, that's again another story for another time. But anything else that you're seeing that right now in the 2025, the height of the spring market and the DMV, what are you guys seeing in MBH?
Yeah, so properties being sold by trusts, by living trusts, and that's something that's gained popularity. I think it's a good idea to have property in trusts for estate planning, and for I think there are sometimes tax benefits to that, and sometimes not, I'm told. But a lot of our sellers, especially the higher end of properties, are selling properties out of trusts. And a living trust is basically, it's a legal construct that is separate from the individuals, where you put property that when those individuals pass away or are ill, other people handle those properties for the next generation, or for the person while they're ill to take care of them in their later years. And then once they pass, their heirs or their beneficiaries, they're called, receive that property without going through probate. So yeah, so the without going through probate is a big part of that. But I would say in Ashburn, where my office is, a lot of people are selling out of trusts, right? And so that doesn't add much complexity to the situation. We just verify trust documents, and something to think about. So whenever someone buys a property individually, it's a conversation I strike up. I say, hey, have you considered putting this in a trust? And most buyers who have kids, or they will say, yeah, we've thought about it. We've considered it. And the good thing is my law firm, separate from MBH, does living trusts. And so a lot of times I'll give them my card and I'll say, hey, after you close on this property, if you want, I can help you do a trust. We'll put that property in the trust. And they'll ask me questions like, is that okay with my lender? Is that okay with so-and-so? I was like, yeah, your lender actually is okay with that. And a lot of people do it. And so a lot of it's just sort of getting past what people know from AI and from Google, and giving them real guidance so they actually take that next step in putting property into trust. When you don't have a trust and something, and you pass away, that's when you get into the thing I talked about before, which is tracking down heirs to a property. And a lot of times people have complicated family situations. where there's people that might own an interest that they didn't know, and we would have to track them down. So it solves a lot of problems by having a living trust. It cleans up title greatly in the event that someone passes. And I would say this, there have been more sellers that are estates recently. I would say that just as there's a generational shift now, and people selling properties out of an estate, which is a sale that didn't have a trust. There might have been a will, which helps a little bit. Sometimes there isn't a will, and those sellers have a much tougher time getting to the closing table. So yeah, think about doing a trust if you own at least one property. Definitely if you do own two. And another topic is, maybe for a different day, LLCs. So if you want to further protect yourself from liability, putting property in LLC. Because I will say this, one thing people don't know is that revocable living trusts, which is what we're talking about, don't have liability protection. Almost none. And people go, oh, I thought it gave me protection. I go, no, it doesn't. Irrevocable trusts sometimes do. Different topic for a different day.
Sure.
But yeah, we can go off into tangents, but hopefully the idea of having a trust, if you own property, makes life much simpler for your next of kin.
Absolutely, and there's quite a few investors in the DMV and surrounding obviously metro markets that I see quite a bit of LLC docs, and again that's another title concern too, is making sure do we have the correct signers. I know with some of the institutional sellers that we represent, the title partner that I try to, the banks, they have their own preferred title companies a lot of times, and I'll ask them, hey, well, can we put this out with somebody like yourself that can review all this as well, because you guys know the market locally more so than somebody in another state that's handling a whole bunch of files. But yeah, that is something that I would say quite often is not maybe the yearly corporation fee with the state hasn't been paid in X amount of years. Well, that technically is needs to be made right in order.
No, we find that quite often.
Yeah.
A lot of investors that bought the house 2 years ago, they're trying to flip it now, and they just didn't pay their $110 fee.
Right.
Luckily in Virginia, you have several years to pay that and reinstate the LLC.
Yeah.
You go past, I think, 6 years, you're dead in the water.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of times we advise people, hey, go pay your fee, bring the document back, and then you can close as a valid LLC. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Without getting too much into the weeds of real big title problems and issues and so forth, what would you say? I mean, I know what probably the most common one is that I come up with, but I mean, what are you seeing today in terms of encroachments or something like that you might be able to share, about in terms of, is that ever an issue, not just with the buyer, but with the lender?
Yeah, so shared driveways,
Yeah.
That's something we see a lot in the Northern Virginia area, Great Falls, McLean, there's a lot of properties. So to issue title insurance, the property has to have ingress and egress, either to a public street or by agreement. And we just verify if there's a shared driveway that an existing property, it's easy. There's either an easement that exists, either it's recorded, usually in the land records. And if there is a maintenance agreement between the parties, that's important. Who shovels snow, who has to do this, who has to pay for that to be done. And most properties that exist have that. Newer construction, say you're building a new lot and you want to share a driveway with your existing neighbor and you guys are okay with that, there need to be documents recorded to do that. And I've helped people do that. Actually write up easements for new shared driveways and the maintenance agreement to them. That's not very common, but it's something I've run into. Mechanics liens, not a common thing, but something in the past week I was asked about. Right, and that's something we haven't talked about, but I'll talk about it a little bit. So in Virginia, if a contractor does work on the property and they aren't paid for it, they have a certain number of days to go and file a lien on the property, which is very easy to do. It's a one-page lien. They file it for $10, and there's a lien on that person's property. And most of the time, it's legitimate. But recently, I was informed of one that might not have been very legitimate. And so what happened was the property was under contract. There were some repairs being done, and that contractor put a lien for 5 figures of money on that property. Totally threw a wrench into the situation. And then once the mechanics lien is filed, the contractor has to file a lawsuit in court within a certain amount of time to perfect that lien. Then it becomes a lawsuit, and this one became a lawsuit. Imagine trying to sell your house and you have not just a lien, but then you have a lawsuit to battle. Nightmare scenario. Yeah. But all is not lost. At the end of the day, money talks, right? So the good thing is that this closing that's going to happen means that money is going to come out the other end of it, And that contractor, if they are smart, would probably accept money to pay off that lien and walk away versus going through the court system, spending a year to maybe not get any money. So that's been coming up and dovetailing into title insurance. So we talked about different levels of owner's title insurance. There's two. There's a basic and enhanced. The enhanced one costs about 20% more, usually. Well worth the upcharge. The enhanced owner's policy does cover mechanics liens. So at closing, we get the seller to sign an affidavit saying we've paid all our contractors. We trust them, we notarize it, it's under oath. But if they forgot, the enhanced policy would go in and pay that contractor off and clear the title. Nope, like hands off, done. If the basic policy was purchased, buyer's on their own to do that. If no policy is purchased, buyer's on their own to resolve that issue.
Wow.
So that's a huge benefit, and it doesn't come up a lot, but it's out there.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm surprised it's not more common.
Yeah.
To be honest, I mean, basically holding up a seller for like hostage for money on a lien, it almost seems like it would happen more. And there's a whole legal scheme to prevent that and fight that, but that involves court legal fees, which is.
Well, yeah, I mean, during the great financial crisis, it happened quite a bit. Back in the Baltimore metro area, I know that there was quite a bit of that going on, and it was a lot of fraudulent stuff, right? And so you're right, though, money does talk. And I think that at the end of the day, folks, Rich can help you with some of these other issues that maybe would be outside of the scope of MBH. But if you want a reputable title company to work with in the DMV, I highly recommend Rich and his team. At the end of the show notes, you'll find Rich's contact information and best way to reach him at MBH. Rich, is there anything you can share again with just maybe casting that a little bit further to buyers maybe outside the DMV or anything they should, I know we touched on some things, but any final thoughts?
Yeah, so on the first topic we talked about, you don't have to have an attorney in a title company to do your closing, but it's a good idea to have that. And it's one of the joys of my job is to actually solve a problem that someone looks at and goes, oh, this is such a big problem, but because relative to what I've seen in court and in all my years, it's not a big problem. To make it what looked like a mountain look like a molehill to someone is my favorite thing. And a lot of that's by not blowing out of proportion. Yeah. And there isn't a lot that happens in title that's insurmountable or impossible, but it's how it's handled. Yeah. So really pick a title company that's reputable, that has a long track record, and that will pick up the phone when you call them. My cell number, I'll put it out on your thing, and most of my agents and people, they have my cell number. Yeah. They'll text me on weekends, I'll respond, and my favorite thing is just make that problem go away so that person can have a fun weekend. And they go to the closing table, they'll say, I appreciate you just picking up the phone and answering my text. I go, it's so easy for me to do it, it makes people's days. So find a title company that does that like MBH, and you'll have a great, smooth closing.
So Rich, how can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a real easy email. It's rich@mbh.com. And my cell number, I'll put it out there. I'm not afraid of that. It's 703-477-2548. You can text me to get a quote for a transaction. You have a question you want to ask me. If there's a deal at another title company going sideways, check in with me, and I promise I'll respond. Thank you.
Rich, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and share this video with someone who might need it. Thank you for watching.